So where are we here? We're at the bottom of page two, and as I said at the last video, it's just a very famous section of Hobbes. Right? There's no more famous. It's where the quote came from in the greatest hits list. I'll just read it. Whatsoever, therefore, is consequent to a time of war, where every man is enemy to every man, the same consequent to the time wherein men live without other security than what their own strength and their own invention shall furnish them withal. And what he is describing is what we will come to know more familiarly through reading Locke and Rousseau as the state of nature. And really, the state of nature, he's just defined it there. Firstly, as a state of war, but secondly, he said that the same consequence of the time wherein men live without other security than what their own strength and their own invention shall furnish them with. That is, without the protection of government. That is, wherever, in Hobbes' way of thinking of things, wherever you have human beings living their lives without the Leviathan, without government, that is the state of nature, and that state is a state of war, war of everyone with everyone else. And what he's really doing in this paragraph is describing just how awful, how terrible such a situation is for human beings. He continues, in such condition, there is no place for industry, because the fruit thereof is uncertain. That is, no one bothers to work because you don't have any realistic expectations that you'll reap the benefits of your work. And consequently, no culture of the earth, no navigation, nor use of the commodities that may be imported by sea, no commodious building, no instruments of moving and removing such things as require much force, no knowledge of the face of the earth, no account of time, no arts, no letters, no society, and which is worst of all, continual fear and danger of violent death, and the life of man, solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short. So that pretty amazing, and who knows if it's true, but he's really laying it on thick that the state of nature is just a horror. It's a living hell. That without government, we are going to be in continual fear of our lives. There will be no security. And so there'll be no civilization. And this you may connect up with, generally speaking, I think, with what Dante said. That is, in order to have growth of knowledge, intellectual growth, you have to have peace. I think this is a very similar thought. In order to have the things that we take for granted as being civilization, arts and letters, technology, science, commerce, you have to have government. Otherwise, you won't have any of these things. And we can see rhetorically where this is leading. It's leading to the necessity, why human beings have to, for their own good, give up some of their freedom in order to live under law, because without that, they've got nothing really. He continues and says, it may seem strange to some man that has not well weighed these things, that nature should thus dissociate and render men apt to invade and destroy one another. And he may therefore, not trusting to this inference made from the passions, desire perhaps to have the same confirmed by experience. That is, we may be reluctant to give credence to the way that Hobbes, his pessimistic view of the way that human beings treat each other. But he says, refer to your own experience. He says, let him therefore consider with himself. When taking a journey, he arms himself and seeks to go well accompanied. When going to sleep, he locks his doors. When even in his house, he locks his chests. And this, when he knows there be laws and public officers, armed to revenge all injuries shall be done him. What opinion he has of his fellow subjects when he rides armed, of his fellow citizens when he locks his doors, and of his children and servants when he locks his chests? Does he not there as much accuse mankind by his actions as I do by my words? That is, we secure ourselves against each other, even though we live in, a state of government and not in the state of nature. But the next point he makes is quite important. He says, but neither of us accuse man's nature in it. The desires and other passions of man are in themselves no sin. That is, we are driven by our selfish desires. We are animals, basically. And, that's just the way we're made. And so, to some degree, conflict, even violence, I think he's saying, is inevitable. He says, no more are the actions that proceed from those passions till they know a law that forbids them, which till laws be made they cannot know, nor can any law be made till they have agreed upon the person that shall make it. Which is pretty amazing. He's basically saying that nothing is really wrong until there's an established law that forbids something is wrong. He continues, it may peradventure be thought there was never such a time nor condition of war as this, and I believe it was never generally so over all the world. But there are many places where they live so now, for the savage people in many places of America. And of course, he's completely wrong about this. Nothing savage about the people of America, Native Americans, but he's reaching for an example. He says, except the government of small families, the concord whereof dependeth on natural laws, to have no government at all. He's wrong about that. And live at this day in that brutish manner, as I said before. Okay, so he's wrong about that, there's no question. But he's looking for an example of the state of nature in his contemporary world, and he's pointing to a country or a part of the world that he just doesn't understand or know anything about. So he's failing to find empirical support for what he said. But he continues, howsoever it may be perceived what manner of life there would be where there were no common power to fear, by the manner of life which men that have formerly lived under peaceful government used to degenerate into a civil war. That he does know about, living through the 1600s, living through the period of the English Civil War, that he's experienced what happens when government breaks down. And what happens isn't pretty. Continues, but though there had never been any time wherein particular men were in a condition of war against one another, yet in all times kings and persons of sovereign authority, because of their independency, are in continual jealousies, and in the state and posture of gladiators, having their weapons pointing and their eyes fixed on one another, that is, their forts, garrisons, and guns, upon the frontiers of their kingdoms, and continual spies upon their neighbors, which is a posture of war. But because they uphold thereby the industry of their subjects, there doesn't follow from it that misery which accompanies the liberty of particular men. That is, he has just suggested that we can look out in the world and see that the countries of the world, the different nations of the world, because they have no common power above them, are in a state of nature and a state of continual war with each other. Now, whether that's true today, whether it was true in the 17th century, I'm not really sure. But that's what he's saying. But listen to this last part. To this war of every man against every man, this is also consequent, that nothing can be unjust. The notions of right and wrong, justice and injustice have there no place. Where there is no common power, there is no law. Where no law, no injustice. Force and fraud are in war the two cardinal virtues. Justice and injustice are none of the faculties, neither of the body nor mind. If they were, they might be in a man that were alone in the world, as well as his senses and passions. They, justice and injustice, are qualities that relate to men in society, not in solitude. So there's no such thing as the just and the unjust in human life until there is a government there that can enforce the law. It's impossible, therefore, to really wrong somebody in the state of nature because there's no law. There's no established law that forbids any action. People can basically do whatever they want as long as they believe it's in their own self-interest to protect themselves from others. They, justice and injustice, are qualities that relate to men in society, not in solitude. It is consequent also to the same condition that there be no property, no dominion, no mine and thine distinct, but only that to be every man's that he can get, and for so long as he can keep it. That is, there's no private property in the state of nature. Nobody owns anything in the state of nature. You just are able to keep something as long as you can keep it, as long as you're strong enough to keep others from taking it away from you, which won't be long. And he ends that paragraph by saying, and thus much for the ill condition which man, by mere nature, is actually placed in, though with a possibility to come out of it, consisting partly in the passions, partly in his reason. So he has rhetorically sort of painted us into this horrible corner where he's described the state of nature as being so horrible that we will do whatever we can to get out of it. Even though in the state of nature, we have no controls on our behavior, really, so that we're absolutely free, we can't really enjoy that freedom, and we would do anything really to get out of that hellish situation. And so he's going to offer a solution that consists, as he says, partly in the passions, that is, partly in our selfish desires, and partly in our reason, partly in our intelligence. We're going to figure out a way to get a better deal for ourselves in this horrible state of nature. And he finishes and says, the passions that incline men to peace are fear of death, desire of such things as are necessary to commodious living, and a hope by their industry to obtain them. And reason suggests convenient articles of peace upon which men may be drawn to agreement. These articles are which otherwise are called the laws of nature, whereof I shall speak more particularly in the 2 following chapters. So it's not giving anything away to sort of say he does have a solution to this, horrible situation that he's painted. And that is that human beings can create government. They can create the Leviathan, a being, an artificial being, the state that is strong enough to keep everybody afraid and to establish law and what we consider to be justice.